Hey, what's happening, YouTube? Welcome back to Moose Preparedness. I am Moose, coming from slightly degraded operations as we are, again, moving. So one of the things I wanted to go into and do is, I don't know about many of you, but I read a lot. And one of the biggest things that I want to kind of push out there is, if you're not reading to try and better yourselves, you're obviously, if you're just doom scrolling or following social media, you're not growing your brain. And it really is to your detriment. And there's a lot of good information out there, but there's also a lot of crap information out there. So one of the things I wanted to do was start another series. I've already got the Prepper Gun series. You can find them on some of my other stuff, but I wanted to do a review series of books. And the first book that I wanted to talk about was The Next Civil War by Stephen, I think it's Marche. So bottom line up front, would I recommend this book? It's a solid 6, maybe. Find it used, go to a library. I would not spend the money on it again. I think I got it for, oh, there you go. Got it for $9.95, and I got it as a discounted book because I was at a local bookstore. So the good, bad, and the ugly about it, the majority of the book is written by some liberal Canadian guy by the name of Stephen Marche. And the reason why I say liberal Canadian dude, so there's a picture of him in the back. It is very heavily biased. It is an incredibly biased book, almost to the point where it was unreadable at many points, because of the fact it basically assumed that one side or the other was mostly the right, the conservative right, was the culprit for the entirety of all the situations and scenarios that he could come up with. I don't think that's factually correct. I think that is wrong to assume. And I think that because of that, it definitely slanted or skewed a lot of the stuff that he brought up. So as you can see, I went through it. There's lots of highlights. I'll try and show you highlights and notes. I write inside the margins. I'm one of those horrible people that writes inside of a book. I say writing to myself on the bottom here. So he broke it down into 5 likely scenarios based off of some factual evidence. Used sources like the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has been discredited multiple times as definitely a partisan group. But I actually read this book prior to the most recent election in 2024. And so like some of my questions were he basically presumed that Biden was going to retake the White House, or a Democrat was going to retake the White House or keep the White House, and that the majority of what was going to follow was going to be the right's reaction to that happening. So he broke it down into several books or several parts of it. So obviously, he got the wrong person in there or party in the White House. So I wrote in there like, hey, it was incorrect in terms of what happens in 2024 if Trump wins. It's got a lot of like things similar to that. So there was a lot of assumptions made when this book was written. So I'm trying to keep fingering through this book to try and find the actual breakdown. So the 5 scenarios is the Battle of the Bridge, the Portrait of Assassination, the Fall of New York, the outbreak of widespread violence, and then the end of the Republic. So Battle of the Bridge, quick synopsis, if you remember the Bundy Ranch back in the 20-teens, somewhere around there, where there was a standoff between the government and the populace in terms of grazing land, and it became a who's who in the zoo and who stood up for who, and people showing up with rifles on both sides, except for this is based around a bridge that they decided to close off because it was unsafe, because they hadn't had the chance to repair it, because the government was failing in the eyes of the people. So we're going to screw you. We're going to do the bridge anyway. And it became a symbol of government ineptitude. And then the sheriff kind of takes place. I think it kind of reminds me of, I think he was watching a lot of, can't remember the African-American sheriff's name. I think it's Clark. But he talked about how this guy rose to prominence, and basically there was some infighting, and they basically called in the United States military, and the military mopped them up, and then did kind of a counterterrorism strategy against its own people. A lot of that I thought was kind of plausible, in some respects with like how it could get escalated, but I thought it was improbable, specifically. Um, you know, I thought it was, I thought it was basically it was unlikely that the military is going to be used on its own people, and that would be stood for. Um, I mean, he brings up stuff like this, like the accessibility for military grade weaponry from the citizenry. Um, it's not difficult to convert an AR-15 into a rough approximation of an M16. Well, that tells me right there you don't know what you're talking about at all. Um, hand grenades, drones, 50 cals, includes radiological weapons, blah da 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 da. Like, kind of odd. So that was the Battle of the Bridge. The next one was a presidential assassination. So this all centered around, a gunman taking out a president, which I found was very ironic because I was reading this right after the assassination attempt against Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. But I mean, he's got all sorts of stuff, the radicalization from Dave Rubin's or Joe Rogan's of the world. Okay, odd, but I mean, what about his views on Antifa? Like, he brought up the left every now and again, but he basically seems to think, or his presupposition was, that the entire right has all the guns and all the training. But I don't remember many of the right folks burning things down in riots, in the mostly peaceful riots, right? So the one thing he did say is and I even ear tagged it there, this whole little paragraph here. I'll try not to read too much of it, but he's basically saying tribalism affects society as a whole. It's an infiltrated commerce, religion as much as the institutions of law and government. It's worth noting that not all of these trends predate Trump, sometimes by decades. I would say that's probably accurate, but I do think that he threw a lot of that down to kind of say that it's worse now. I do think that he's right in some of his facts with regards to how hyper-partisanship we are and how that's affecting things. So the parties become consumed with defeating their opponents rather than building a country. I'd say that's a fairly accurate statement. We always used to talk about meeting across the aisle. I remember back in the days when I was a kid and Newt Gingrich was around. They fought all the time, but they still talked and they got stuff done. I mean, we haven't passed a budget in Congress in how many years? So it becomes more concerned with what we really showed them by screwing up their bill, vice coming together. So I mean, there's little bits and pockets in there that seem plausible or seem accurate to what I've seen. However, there's a lot of it to where it does not seem plausible at all, or he draws the wrong conclusions from it. All right, so the fall of New York. That whole chapter is about what happens if a Hurricane Sandy type scenario hits, and just wipes out New York City. For those of you who don't know, the reason why New York City is so incredibly valuable to the United States is there is an absolute metric butt ton, and that is an actual measurement, but there's more than that. There's a butt ton of commerce that comes through New York City. And so what happens like when they talked about Hurricane Sandy hitting, again, I've referenced going up to New York City, and I'll do a video on this probably right after this one. So for those of you who can read it, so this is a Ready New York. This is their emergency preparedness guide. Look at all the freaking languages that comes in. So it comes in every damn language from Chinese, English, French, Haitian Creole, Italian, Korean, Polish, Russian, Spanish, Bengali, Chinese. But it's got a whole bunch of stuff because Hurricane Sandy was so devastating to him. Now, his whole thing is that because of global warming and a whole bunch of other things, that's what's causing this. That and the fact that all of the hurricane levees that they're supposed to put around the Bay of New York fail because, government ineptitude. So I agreed there. They didn't get all their stuff fixed. But yeah, it was all, crime. Again, here's some of the wording that lets you know the biases, right? Climate crises and mass inequality have been preludes to civil war and revolutions everywhere. What climate crisis has ever been a prelude to civil war? None that I can remember offhand. Maybe I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, please tell me I am wrong in the comments and I'll look it up. But, it's just like that kind of hyperbole was throughout, and it made it harder to kind of sift the wheat through the chaff, if that makes any sense. Um, you know, there's a lot of these other things that he talks about, the boredom problem, how again, I'm going through for the highlights I wrote down in the book. Again, I don't want to be that person who's like, oh, you just thumbed through it and found things. No, I actually read this book. One of the things, if you can't tell, like, so this bookshelf used to be full. That bookshelf used to be full. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 bookshelves plus the God knows how many books by my side of the bed right now, of my list of books to read. And it's not just me, it's my whole family. It's one of those things that keeps us in. But he talks about all the boring stuff that we no longer talked about because it doesn't sell. Talking with, you need to have that hyper centralization of everything, and so that creates everybody to tune everything out. And then he has a whole lot of other things here. So COVID as a pretest, he talks about how the United States can't even convince its citizens not to drink at bars during the plague. What plague? Hyperbole? Maybe. Democracy is a system balancing the rights of individuals with the rights of the state. One of democracy's deepest flaws is that no one gets elected for catastrophes they're going to prevent. I thought that line was good. That's why I kept it highlighted. But what is the reason why that people couldn't be convinced? They don't trust their government. Do as I say, not as I do. I mean, I was living in California at the time. I was completely locked down, and I'm watching Gavin Newsom eat food. I was watching him eat out. I was watching Nancy Pelosi on TV go and get her hair blown out. But yet I was literally to the point where it's like you could not go anywhere. So again, I was on a military base. We were locked down, like no shit, locked down. You cannot go out the gate. You go out the gate, you don't have permission to go outside the gate. You're AWOL, you are breaking orders. So yeah, they don't trust the government because they see hypocrisy like that all the time. And so what happened with Canada and Trudeau? What happened with Boris Yeltsin, or not Boris Yeltsin, the British Prime Minister? He got caught going out and having lavish parties. Well, is it a plague? Is it not a plague? So, I see some of this, but it's also like when he says, democracy, people have to do this. It was sounding more like an iron fist. You will do this, which I didn't like. Listen to the science. Failure to act on their insights might have consequences. We did this. We played this song and dance before. And he brings up COVID a lot. It's like, okay, hey, it even says COVID is a pretest for why we should be listening to climate change. Well, why? We saw that COVID was a test, and then we see all these things that came out afterwards that, all those things that we said were wrong. Yeah, or we called you science deniers, we shut down your stuff. Yeah, oops, maybe not. So it just drives me nuts because it's lines like that. I'm trying not to get too influenced politically, but it's like you have found things where it was contradictory and people's lives were ruined because of it. It makes me very angry to have somebody in there say, well, you needed to crack down harder and trust the science. Like, well, unfortunately, science is what you pay for. Look at Philip Morris and look at some of the tobacco companies. They paid for the science to say that cigarettes were healthy for pregnant women. You pay the right study. They can say what you want. That one goes through a lot of these things. Said it was people didn't have enough food in the cities. Yeah, I know. So when we were talking to the guys in the emergency operations center and talking to some of the other folks, FDNY, NYPD, how does New York get its food? How do they get their food? They're on a freaking island for most part of it. We're not talking necessarily, but we're looking at New York City itself. They have to go to the bodegas. Well, how do the bodegas or the supermarkets, the little tiny stores, how do they get their food? Well, they all rely on the waterways. They rely on the bridges, and the trains, and they rely on that stuff. If that stuff stops, they starve to death because their apartments are too damn small because everybody's living on top of each other. We're talking 8 million people on a tiny little island. They're all living on top of each other. Where are they stocking food? Can they even afford to stock food? It's stupidly expensive there. Um, I'm currently living in the South, not for much longer, but we're here in the South. I could get a heck of a lot more food for my money down here than I ever could there, and it's the same food. Um, so how are they prepared? Water. Water weighs a lot of. It's a lot of weight. It's about 8.3, 8.4 pounds for a gallon of water. How are you getting your food and water? And one of the biggest things he brings up in the book is he's like, well, there's a disparity between the folks who are out in the countryside because they're able to survive, and these folks in New York City, yeah, they're sorry, gonna die. So it sucks because it's the financial capital, or one of the I think it's either the or one of the financial capitals in the United States, right? Wall Street's there. There's a whole bunch of commerce that goes through there, but at the same time, it's like they are wholly reliant on outside support. And if you cut off that outside support through, in this case, a hurricane, because nobody listens to climate change, they all, everybody dies. And so it's like, well, these people in the rural areas, like they're going to survive, and these people in New York, it's like, okay, well, that tells me that I need to move to a rural area. I need to have food on hand. I need to not do that stuff. Kind of like, there's a word for it. Oh yeah, it's called prepping, dumbass. Anyway, go through that one, follow New York. It was very interesting. He talks about how this, people are getting, you know, she somehow, some way, this gal ended up buying, the protagonist in this particular scenario ends up buying a Glock and a shotgun. Like, oh, cool. How? Where? I'm telling you, I went through New York City. I didn't see any guns. Now, I'm sure they're there, but it's not like that. She can just go out and randomly buy a Glock. Not like I can here. I can go down to the local Walmart from a guy I met and exchange driver's license numbers, write down a bill of sale, and walk away. Live in a free state. Outbreak of widespread violence. Very interesting. At the time, I thought it was bullshit. Maybe I've changed my mind as it's now past the first of the year and we've had some issues already. But he said only a spark is needed to catch everything off like wildfire. And he said only a spark is needed, one major domestic terror event that shifts the perception of the country. An anti-government patriot who takes his rage against the federal authority and finds the expression is in a drone loaded with explosives that's flown into the Capitol dome. First off, interesting scenario, especially with all the suicide drones. If you haven't seen those, look in the Ukraine, Russo-Ukrainian conflict. But why does it have to be domestic terrorists, and why is it always a conservative dude? I mean, Weather Underground, anybody? No, we don't remember those. We don't remember Ted Kaczynski doing those things. It's interesting though, because it's like ISIS. I wrote down here why it could be ISIS cartels, sleeper cells. Interesting. That's had precedence recently. But the thing is like he even brings up stuff like Pierre Trudeau, an icon of liberalism, to declare martial law and suspended civil liberties. That's the one thing that I took away from here that terrifies me. So with these sleeper cells that are out here, potentially causing issues for the government, potentially causing issues for the United States, my number one concern is I look at it and go, they're going to do Patriot Act 2.0. And they're going to do exactly what he said right there. We're going to suspend civil liberties, and now it's going to be, I don't need a FISA warrant. I don't need a warrant to tap your phone. I'm going to go after stuff. I'm going to use AI or machine learning to basically keep a running tab of where everybody's at. Oh, we now need a digital ID. Oh, we now need to have digital currency, because digital currency allows me to track every single thing you purchase in the name of keeping people safe and for terrorism. So like that part for me scared me on this part. And this is something I've been thinking about for a long time. Again, I read this, oh gosh, last year before the election again. So goes through this, talks about, underlying issues that are going to cause it. The British Army, how they basically couldn't deal with the outbreak of violence. Blah, 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 blah. Exhaustion, what will happen. So one of the things he brought up was that the Brits could not, the reason why the British lost the war is because basically we wore them down. It's the same way that the Viet Cong won in Vietnam. It wasn't necessarily because, I mean, they lost every pitched battle. They lost every single fight against a superior enemy. The reason that they lost was because of exhaustion, and we lost the messaging at home. So that's one of those things that, okay, if you have that going on all around. The last one was a disunion. So we're talking somebody of all, if anybody saw that Civil War movie where Texas and California decide to secede, I would not go out and rent it, see if you can find it for free. Wasn't that great. It was interesting. But where would the breaks be? Main factor would be desire for independence, having a separate or ethnic identity. We don't have a state that has that identity. The only ones he brought up that do would be potentially Puerto Rico, Hawaii, maybe. We have differences everywhere, so he believes it would just basically be broken up. You'd have the West Coast versus the Mid-Atlantic versus the East Coast. There was a whole lot. I took pretty heavy notes all the way up and true. Gun ownership is more likely in the South and Midwest than the Northeast or the Pacific Coast. Why? Gun laws. That's the thing. Weird. Also, he mentioned that proximity to abortion access is much more limited there. Interesting. That's a point. One of the things he said is mostly white and rural against mostly multicultural and urban. And in the 2018 election, density was the single strongest determinant of who voted Democrat and who voted Republican, with 800 people per square mile being the cutoff. That checks out. But what does that tell you? The more populated it is, the more likely you're going to vote for the programs that keep you fat and happy, because you can, right? And the bigger your bureaucracy gets, the more shit you get. The more shit you get, the more you want to vote for them. So basically talked about the disunion. He did bring up, hope at the end, a note for hope. The hope that one hope that should be rejected outright, the hope that everything will work out by itself. He said the only hope for survival is the American spirit. I kind of agree with that point, just because of the fact, if you were alive after 9/11, I remember in the 6 months to maybe the first year or two after September the 11th, 2001, it didn't matter. Black, white, gay, straight, nobody gave a shit. We were all Americans, and we were all there to kind of protect and look out for each other. Similar things happened whenever Hurricane Helene hit. Similar things happened in any of these major situations. If there's an earthquake, if there's a tornado, people come together, they put aside their differences. And I think because we've gotten a little too lax, we haven't had a real big pop in the face, that's where we start thinking, well, I need something to do, I need something to fight against, so that's why I'm going to fight against that person, because they believe something different than I do. So if we could bring back that spirit, unfortunately, I don't want it to come at the cost of us getting popped like we did in 9/11, to bring everybody back together into the fold. I mean, at the end of the day, I just want people to be good to one another and to do the right thing and try and be a good neighbor. I don't care. You want to smoke pot? Go smoke pot. I don't have to be a part of it. You want to have, a fully automatic machine gun? Go ahead. Go on with your bad self. As long as you're not messing around with other people, hurting other people, I really don't care. Because really, at the end of the day, we need to come together and look at it. But overall, again, I give this book a solid 6. Don't give them the money by buying it, because at least to me, it didn't read that well. Just be aware there's some absolute biases in this book. Again, I'm coming at it with my own biases, but going through and trying to look at it rationally, logically, and without bias, it was very hard to read and not see it. So again, something worth reading, but I wouldn't pay for it. Let me know what you thought of the review. Let me know if you have any other books you'd like me to review that I haven't already read. I'm going to start doing a whole series on them as I read them and go through them. And I want to give you a detailed analysis because, hey, money and time are finite things. And sometimes if I can give you a decent enough analysis, you can make up your mind whether or not you want to look at it up for yourself. Again, I appreciate you all. Please like, subscribe, comment, do all the YouTube things because they are absolutely flagging me and shadow banning me. again, I notice every week I'm losing 10, specifically 10 people every week, which doesn't sound like a lot, but whenever you're being targeted and you can see that, hey, it's slowly moving the dial, it doesn't make sense if it's 10 every week. That's something that's algorithmic. That's not something that's organic. So please share this far and wide, give it a like, and if you have any comments or questions, concerns, just shoot them, put them on the tab, and I'll absolutely try and address them as I can. Thanks again. Stay safe out here.